August 9th, 2010 began like any other summer evening in the English town of Rugby. The sky was slowly darkening, the air still warm, and the streets carried the quiet familiarity of a place where people felt safe enough not to lock every door or question every invitation. At a supported living complex on Little Pennington Street, 27-year-old Gemma Hayter stepped outside, believing she was about to spend time with people she considered friends. Gemma had learning difficulties. She processed the world differently, more openly, more trustingly. She wanted what most people want: acceptance, laughter, a sense of belonging. That desire would be used against her with a cruelty that would shock an entire country. Gemma was known in Rugby as a gentle, vulnerable young woman. She lived independently with support, proud of the small freedoms she had earned. She loved music, chatting, and socializing. Her disability made her trusting, eager to please, and painfully susceptible to manipulation. Over time, a group of local youths had learned this. Daniel Newstead, Chantel Booth, Joe Boyer, Jessica Linus, and Duncan Edwards were not her friends in any real sense. They mocked her, took her money, and treated her as entertainment. To them, Gemma was someone they could control, humiliate, and discard. To Gemma, they were companions, people who included her, even if that inclusion came with cruelty she struggled to understand. That evening, Gemma believed she was going out to have fun. Instead, she was walking into a calculated nightmare. The group led her to a flat on Little Pennington Street, a place that would later be identified as the starting point of prolonged abuse. Inside the apartment, the tone shifted quickly. What may have begun as taunting escalated into systematic humiliation. Gemma was verbally abused, called names, and laughed at. Her money was taken. She was hit, pushed, and degraded while the group encouraged one another, feeding off the power they held over her. Some of the attackers recorded what they were doing on their mobile phones. The footage would later become critical evidence, but at the time it served as entertainment. Proof of dominance over someone who could not fight back. Gemma cried, pleaded, and tried to leave. Witnesses later described her fear as palpable. She managed to escape the flat, injured and terrified, and ran into the night, desperate for safety. But the group followed her. What happened next marked the point of no return. Gemma was chased and dragged toward an isolated railway embankment near Hillmorton Road, a place chosen precisely because it was hidden from public view. Cars passed nearby, but the embankment itself was dark, uneven, and secluded. Any cries for help would be swallowed by distance and darkness. At the railway line, the violence intensified into something almost unimaginable. Gemma was beaten repeatedly with belts, shoes, and metal objects. She was punched and kicked as multiple attackers took turns. The injuries she sustained were catastrophic, dozens of fractures and wounds to her head and body. At some point, her clothes were forcibly removed. Naked, bleeding, and disoriented, she was left exposed on the cold ground, her dignity stripped away along with her safety. Despite her injuries, Gemma attempted to climb the steep embankment. Whether she was trying to escape or simply disoriented by pain and fear is unknown. What is known is that her body could no longer endure the trauma. She collapsed and died alone in the darkness. The group walked away, leaving her where she fell, making no attempt to seek help. For them, the night was over. For Gemma, life had ended in terror and abandonment. The following morning, a cyclist traveling near the railway line noticed something disturbing and alerted authorities. Police arriving at the scene immediately recognized that this was not an accident. The severity and pattern of injuries pointed unmistakably to a sustained, targeted attack. Gemma's body told a story of prolonged suffering, and investigators understood they were dealing with a homicide rooted in cruelty rather than impulse. The investigation moved quickly. Witness statements placed Gemma with the group the previous night. CCTV footage tracked movements through the area. Most damning of all were the mobile phone videos recorded by the attackers themselves, capturing moments of abuse and confirming the identities of those involved. Within days, all 5 suspects were arrested. As details emerged, public reaction shifted from shock to outrage. The case was not only about murder, it was about exploitation. Gemma had been selected because she was vulnerable. Her disability made her an easy target, and that reality forced uncomfortable questions about how society protects, or fails to protect, those who depend on others for support. During the trial, the court heard harrowing testimony. Medical experts detailed the extent of Gemma's injuries. Friends and support workers spoke about her trusting nature and her longing for companionship. Jurors were shown still images from the videos, though the most graphic footage was withheld due to its disturbing nature. The defendants showed little remorse. Some attempted to minimize their roles, shifting blame onto one another. Others smirked or appeared detached, as though the proceedings were an inconvenience rather than an accounting for a human life. Daniel Newstead, Chantel Booth, and Joe Boyer were convicted of murder. Jessica Lenis and Duncan Edwards were convicted of manslaughter, reflecting differing levels of participation but not absolution. Sentences were severe, reflecting both the brutality of the crime and the vulnerability of the victim. The judge described the attack as sustained, sadistic, and utterly inhumane, emphasizing that Gemma had been treated as less than human. For Gemma's family, no sentence could undo the loss. They spoke of a woman who loved life, who wanted to belong, and who trusted too easily in a world that did not deserve that trust. Their grief was compounded by the knowledge that Gemma had sought friendship and found violence instead. The case sent shockwaves through the United Kingdom. It became a defining example of mate crime, a term used to describe offenses where perpetrators befriend vulnerable individuals with the intention of exploiting or abusing them. Advocacy groups cited Gemma's death as proof that such crimes are often overlooked until they escalate beyond repair. Her name became associated with calls for better education, stronger safeguarding measures, and greater awareness of how easily vulnerability can be weaponized. In the years since, Gemma Hayter's story has remained a grim reminder that danger does not always come from strangers lurking in the dark. Sometimes it wears a familiar face, uses friendly words, and pretends to offer belonging. Her killers were not monsters in disguise. They were ordinary people who chose cruelty over compassion and violence over humanity. Gemma left her home that evening believing she was going to spend time with friends. She never returned. What remains is a case file heavy with evidence, a community marked by shame and sorrow, and a legacy that continues to challenge society to confront uncomfortable truths. The most terrifying predators are not always hidden. They're sometimes welcomed in, trusted, and given power over those least able to defend themselves.